Here are some of the tools that you will need for sheetrock, also called drywall repair. This is an inexpensive drywall saw that's available at any hardware store. I believe I bought this one at Lowe's. This is a self-starting saw. If you'll hold the tip against the drywall with slight pressure and slightly twist and push, it'll start its own hole. If the hole in your drywall is larger than 1.5 inches in diameter, you would want to use this saw to make it a little larger and square it up so you can cut a piece of drywall to go in that hole. Lay some square or rectangular shape that's slightly larger than the hole you're going to repair. Lay that over the sheetrock and trace around it. And then you can also use that to trace around a new piece of sheetrock that you're going to place in that hole and cut inside that traced line in order to make the patch you're going to make a little smaller than the hole that you're repairing. This is what I call a sanding sponge. You can use it to sand your drywall, and you can dampen this sponge in a pail of water to cut down on the dust that you have when you sand drywall. It has different grits on different sides, and it's reusable. This one is, I don't know how old. I've used it many times. These sanding sponges come in several different sizes, and again are available, I know, at Lowe's. You can also use 3M wet or dry black sandpaper, like a 220 grit. You can wet sand with that. Regular sandpaper you cannot wet sand with. You'd have to dry sand with it, and if you do that, you need to hold a vacuum cleaner right under the area that you're sanding, because that sheetrock dust tends to get all over the house. If you're going to use sandpaper, you need to use a small wooden block along with that sandpaper, so you'll be sanding with a perfectly flat surface. Sand the drywall compound with very light pressure, just like the weight of your hand is all you need. Sand in an X pattern, then a circular pattern. Try to avoid sanding the bare drywall because you'll rough up the paper surface on the drywall, and then your paint won't look right. Keep a small pail of clean water close by and rinse your sponge out often and squeeze it almost dry. This is joint compound. No, it's not to be confused with rolling joints. This is used for sheetrock repair. Very easy to use, water cleanup. Available at Lowe's. If you've never used joint compound before, the biggest mistake you'll make is using too much at a time. All it takes is a very thin layer. Allow it to dry, lightly sand it, take a look at it. If you need more, add just another thin layer. You can also reinforce repairs with fiberglass tape, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes. This is a sheetrock knife. You can also use a cheaper plastic knife. They come in different widths for different size jobs. This one is the type that a professional would use. It has a stainless steel blade. For most small repairs, all you would need would be a small, say 6 or 8 inch knife. You spread the drywall compound with this knife at, say, roughly a 45-degree angle. Now, if you're cutting a hole, a new hole, for like an outlet box for a receptacle, you could use this stud finder, or another way to find where the studs are, and the studs are 16 inches apart on a wall. You can tap with your hand or a screwdriver handle, and when you hear the most hollow sound, that would be between the studs. The closer you get to a stud, the more solid the sound. Here is how you cut a hole in drywall. Start at the center of your cut, push slightly on the drywall saw and twist slightly, and it will start its own hole, and then you can saw to one side, turn the blade around, and saw to the other side. This is how you would cut a small piece of drywall to use as a patch. In these photos I was using a scrap piece of drywall to show you how this goes. You can also drill a hole within your lines for a starting point for your saw if you'd like to do that. When making repairs, always use a razor blade or a utility knife at a 45-degree angle and clean up the sides of these cuts. Taper them a little bit, cut the paper away where you've roughed it up. By doing that, you won't have any little paper fuzz sticking up through your drywall joint compound. Small plastic spreaders shown here on the left work real good with joint compound too. You'll also need a small putty knife shown on the far right to spread the joint compound on the repair before you use your wide knife. Use a small putty knife to fill in your cracks first and bring those up level, and then you can spread more with the wide knife. To repair a hole such as shown here, use a strip of wood wider than the hole and thick enough that it won't split easily. You'll need to back that hole up for your patch that you're going to install. You can also see here that I've cleaned up the edges of this hole with a razor blade. You can see in this photo where I've backed up this hole with a piece of wood and screwed the wood to the drywall with drywall screws, and I screw those screws in just deep enough that they don't tear through the paper, but yet they're recessed enough to be covered with the drywall compound. I need to cut that little bit of paper away from that hole near that wood support, and this is what the repair would look like on the back side of the wall. One screw is all that's needed on this patch to hold it in place. Here I've applied the first layer of joint compound, and like I said before, don't put too much on this. It's going to cause a lot of unnecessary sanding if you do. A small hole or just a dimple in the sheetrock can be easily repaired without using a patch. I put some drywall compound in this hole at a 45-degree angle with my putty knife. Then I let it completely harden before I put another layer of sheetrock compound on top of it with my wide knife. Sand lightly before you apply your first coat with the wide knife. This is self-adhesive fiberglass joint tape. Now this will reinforce a joint should you need to do that. Like if you had a crack in your wall from slight settling of your house, you would need to widen and clean that crack out with a utility knife at a 45-degree angle. Then fill in that crack with your putty knife and lightly sand, and cover that crack with the fiberglass joint tape. Then using your wide knife, apply joint compound over that. They make a cheap paper joint tape, but if you ever use this fiberglass tape, you'll never go back to using that paper tape. I much prefer this over paper. And this is also available from Lowe's Hardware. Light sanding and one more layer of joint compound, and this job will be finished. After you've finished your repair, you'll want to prime it with this bullseye primer. I highly recommend this primer. It dries very quickly, won't hold you up, dries in about 10 minutes. It's great for all surfaces, even glass. I use no other primer. This cleans up with water. It's available with Lowe's as well as many other hardware stores. If after priming and painting your repair you still see defects in it, no problem. Just go back over it with a little bit of spackle or a little bit of this joint compound, let it dry, lightly sand, paint back over it. No problem at all. I hope this video has been beneficial to you. What's in it for me? Not a thing. I just enjoy helping people with the God-given skills that I have. Thanks for watching my videos. I'll see you again soon.